I have been asked, more than once, to explain what happened on the shore. The Confluence's archivists want a clean account, a linear one. They want dates and coordinates and the kind of ordered testimony that fits their recording systems, because they are a species that processes the universe in columns. And the idea of a story that doubles back on itself, that contradicts itself, that carries grief in one hand and something close to dark comedy in the other, that kind of story makes their translation matrices stutter. So I will try to be orderly. I was a scientist before. Orderly was once something I did naturally. The shore was on the northern Mediterranean coast. Though I hesitate to call it the Mediterranean anymore, the sea was the same chemically. The color was close. But a body of water earns its name from the civilizations that ring it. And by the time I arrived, there were no civilizations left to ring anything. There were 400 kilometers of coastline I had walked through on my way south, and in all of it, I had not found a living person, a working radio, a structure with a roof still attached. I had found ash. I had found the particular smell of concrete that has been superheated and allowed to cool. I had found cars on roads that went nowhere because the roads had buckled, and the destination cities no longer existed to receive them.
Ice pockets once.
A dog, still alive. So fundamentally optimistic about the situation that I wept for an hour sitting on the asphalt with it before it died in my arms from something internal I could not diagnose and could not fix. I am a scientist. I was not made for this. I found Jean and Anna and the boy Patrick on a Tuesday in what I estimated was late autumn. They had settled on a small beach that was sheltered from the prevailing winds by a limestone headland. They had a caravan, a travel trailer, the kind that French families took to campsites in the summers that used to exist. They had a small truck. They had a boat, a wooden thing Jean was constantly repairing, though I never saw him use it for anything practical. And they had a burned-out shell of a car that served no purpose I could identify. Except that Jean refused to discuss clearing it away, which I later understood meant it was the car that had brought them here, and that removing it would be a kind of admission. Was dying. He did not say so. He would not have said so. He was a tall man, still handsome in the architecture of his face. But the radiation had gotten into him somewhere and was working through him with the methodical patience of something that has no reason to hurry. He moved carefully, the way men move when they have learned that careless movement costs them more than they can afford. He organized things. He kept the caravan meticulously. He had schedules. For water collection, for the generator's fuel ration, for the maintenance of the truck's engine. And he enforced these schedules with a quiet intensity that I recognized. Because I had seen it before in men who understand that control over small things is the only sovereignty left when large things have been taken away. Anna was something else entirely. She was dark and direct, and she moved through that stripped landscape, like she had decided some weeks earlier that grief was a luxury and had simply set it down. She fed the boy. She fixed things that Jean's schedules identified, but whose actual repair required someone with working hands and a pragmatist's relationship to improvisation. She watched me with an assessment in her eyes when I first walked onto the beach. Not hostile, exactly, but not welcoming either. The eyes of someone who has had to make rapid and accurate judgments about strangers, and has learned that the cost of a wrong judgment is paid immediately. The boy Patrick was 11 or 12. I am still not certain. He had the quality that children have in extremity, which is to say, he was by turns completely childlike and then suddenly not a child at all. And the transitions between these states were unpredictable and sometimes happened mid-sentence. Collected things, smooth rocks mostly. He had an arrangement of them along the base of the caravan's wheel that he tended to with great seriousness and never explained. They let me stay. Jean made it a decision, which I understood meant he needed it to be a decision, needed to be the person who extended or withheld permission. I was grateful enough not to examine the logic closely. For a week, it was simply 4 people surviving in parallel. We did not speak much. There was work, and there was sleep, and in the evenings there was a fire, and we sat around it. And occasionally, Jean would say something about organization, and Anna would respond with something practical and different. And There would be a silence between those two musicians that carried the history of whatever they had been to each other before, which had not been present for, and could only read in the negative space. The evenings to try to fix the radio transmitter I had been carrying for 3 months. It was not a standard transmitter. I had built it, or rather I had assembled it from components. I had stripped from a research installation 200 kilometers north, a facility that had been working, before everything ended, on deep space signal propagation. I had been part of that project, not in a leading role. I was the man who checked the mathematics other people were excited about, the man who said, "Your assumptions here are optimistic," and was thanked politely and mostly not listened to. But I had understood the equipment, and when I left the installation, I had taken what I could carry. What I could carry amounted to a transmitter that, if I could power it adequately and aim it correctly and hold the signal long enough, could reach beyond the ionosphere, beyond the local noise of a dead planet, out into frequencies that, according to the mathematics I had checked and double-checked over 3 months of walking, something should be listening to. I say something because that was as specific as I could be. I had no proof. I had mathematics and dead colleagues, and a working assumption that the universe was statistically unlikely to have produced only us, and a practical recognition that there was nothing left on Earth to transmit to anyway. So the direction of transmission scarcely mattered. Jean watched me work on the transmitter. He did not ask what it was. I think he knew, and I think he found the project either futile or admirable, and had not decided which. And since either conclusion led to approximately the same behavior, watching me without comment, he let the ambiguity stand. Len arrived 9 days after I did. Came from the east, following the coast road, and we heard him before we saw him. A motorbike that had been repaired with parts that did not quite match, making a sound like an argument between two different engines. He was young, 24, 25. Built like someone who had been in the military recently enough that the physical habits were still fully integrated. The posture, the scan, the way he stopped at the edge of our beach and assessed it before committing to the approach. He had food, he had fuel. He had a pack that was organized with the efficiency of someone trained to move fast. He also had, within the first hour, made Patrick laugh. I watched Jean watch this happen, and I understood in that moment how the next weeks were going to go. I want to be careful here because Len was not a villain. This is important to me, even now, even given how it ended. He was 25 years old, in a world where everyone he had ever known was dead, and he had the kind of vitality that does not know how to make itself smaller, and he was not cruel. He was just alive in a way that Jean was no longer quite managing, and Anna, who had been rationing her own aliveness for months, could feel that difference as the way you feel a change in the wind. Jean tightened. He imposed more schedules. He found reasons to establish precedents over the fuel supply, over the boat, over the space inside the caravan. He spoke to Len with the particular courtesy that is really a form of aggression. Every word precisely placed to establish that this was his shore, his family, his arrangement. Len did not understand this, or if he understood it, he disagreed with it, which in practice looked the same. He helped Anna fix things without asking Jean. He taught Patrick card games. He ate with the appetite of someone who had been alone and hungry for a long time, and was now neither, and he did this without apology. I stayed with my transmitter and tried to be furniture. This is not cowardice. I want to be clear about that too. It is what I am. I am the man who checks the mathematics. I am not the man who changes the situation. I understood what was happening between those four people with the same clarity that I could read signal propagation current again. And I understood equally that my intervention would accomplish nothing except to add another variable to an already unstable system. I had by this point gotten the transmitter working. Not well. Power was inconsistent. I had jury-rigged a connection to the truck's battery system, and Jean objected to this on fuel conservation grounds, which was fair, and we had negotiated a daily window of 2 hours in which I could draw from the battery, which was less than I wanted, but more than nothing. The aim was imprecise. I was working without the installation's tracking equipment, using instead a set of calculations I had done by hand in a notebook that was falling apart from being handled too much. But the signal was going out. Free evening for 2 hours. A pulse on a frequency that nothing on Earth was listening to, that I had no evidence anything, anywhere, was listening to, aimed at a portion of the sky that the mathematics said was the most likely direction. Every night, I turned it off and went to sit by the fire, and watched Jean and Len not quite look at each other, and watched Anna move through the space between them, like someone navigating a field she knows his mind. Patrick sat beside me sometimes. He showed me his rock collection. He explained the organization of it, not by size or color, as I had assumed, but by where he had found each one. This one from the road, this one from the waterline, this one from inside the burned car, which he had taken because he thought its shape was interesting, and which Jean had not noticed him take. He told me the names he had given them, not whimsical names, honest geographical ones named for where they had come from. He was making a record. He was 11 years old, and he was making a record of the ground he had covered. I think about that a great deal. The crisis, when it came on a night in what I think was early December, though I had stopped being certain about dates. It came from a direction I had not anticipated, which is to say it came from Jean, who I had understood was diminishing, and who turned out to be diminishing in the way that certain reactions diminish, not weakening but concentrating, becoming more purely themselves, as the external mass is stripped away. I will not describe it in detail. I will say that it was violent, and that it was fast, and that by the time I understood what was happening it was close to over. I will say that Jean was, underneath everything, a man who had spent his entire life believing that civilization was the container that made human beings possible, and that watching civilization dissolve had not freed him, but had instead revealed the architecture of his belief, which was a kind of cage, and that he could not get out of it because the cage was also him. Will say that Len, in the end, was not what he appeared to be either. That youth and vitality are not the same as resilience. That a man who can survive alone on a motorbike for 3 months can still be destroyed by 5 weeks of something else entirely. And I will say that when it was over, the shore was quiet in a way it had not been before, and Anna was alive, and Patrick was alive, and I was alive, and no one else was. Anna sat with Patrick for a long time. She did not weep. Patrick did briefly, in the way children do, fully without restraint, and then finished. He went and checked on his rock collection. I sat by the transmitter. I turned it on. This was not a rational decision. I want to be honest about that. I had 2 hours of battery window left for the day, and I used them. But I was not sitting there running calculations and considering frequencies. I was sitting there because I did not know what else to do, and the transmitter was what I had made, and the direction it pointed was away, and away was what I needed. I sent the standard pulse sequence, and then, because there was no one to hear me, and nothing left to lose, I talked. Whoever they were, whatever they were, what had happened. Not in code. Not in the mathematical shorthand I had been using. In plain language, because plain language was what I had left. I told them about the war. I told them about the coast road and the dog. I told them about Jean and his schedules, and the boat he kept repairing. I told them about Len's mismatched motorbike, and Patrick's rocks, and Anna's hands, and the particular way the fire sounded on a cold evening, when 5 people were sitting around it, and 3 of them were pretending not to notice what was happening among the other 2. Told them we had destroyed ourselves, again, with full awareness of what we were doing and no ability to stop. That this was the most human thing I knew of. Not the war, not the bomb, but those 5 weeks on the beach, the inability to simply coexist. The genius for finding the precise pressure point in any arrangement and pressing it until the arrangement broke. Told them we were still here. I turned the transmitter off when the battery window ran out. Anna had made food. We ate. Patrick showed me a new rock he had found. I went to sleep in my corner of the caravan, and I dreamed of nothing I can remember. In the morning, the transmitter had an incoming signal. I want to be precise about my response to this, because I have been asked about it, and I do not want to manufacture drama where the reality was considerably more mundane. Sat down on the sand. I put my head between my knees. I breathed for approximately 90 seconds. Then I got up and I read the signal. It was not in any language. It was a pulse pattern, mathematical, clearly intentional, built around prime number sequences that demonstrated immediately that whatever had sent it understood prime numbers, which narrowed the possibilities considerably. It was also being transmitted on precisely the frequency I was using, which meant they had been listening for longer than one night. The confluence, though I did not know that name yet, would not know it for weeks, had been in high orbit for 11 months. This I would learn later. They had arrived in our system, following their own observations of the nuclear exchange. And they had done what they apparently always do when they detect the end of a civilization. They had moved to the confirmation position and begun a systematic scan to verify extinction before updating their records and moving on. Their records, at the time of my first transmission, had humanity listed as 96% extinct with the remainder in terminal decline. They had been waiting out the terminal decline. They were, by their own later description, not in any hurry. The confluence does not hurry. They have been doing this for a very long time. They had picked up my earlier pulse sequences, but assessed them as the automated output of a surviving piece of equipment. A transmitter running on a dead timer, broadcasting without a living operator. This assessment was not unreasonable. They had found such systems before. Then I had talked. I am told. And I believe this because the archivist who told me was incapable of the kind of irony that would make it a joke. That my 17 minutes of unstructured monologue into an empty frequency caused a minor crisis in the Confluence's assessment division. Not because of the content exactly, because of the structure, because of the way it worked. They are a hive logic species, not a hive in the simple sense. They have individual bodies, individual experiences, individual minds. Their decision-making, their cultural architecture, runs on consensus in a way that's so deep and so old that they have largely lost the ability to conceive of functioning without it. When I say they process the universe in columns, this is not a metaphor. It is a description of a cognitive style so fundamental to what they are that they cannot fully see it from the inside. They had listened to me describe, in real time and plain language, a group of 5 people destroying themselves through the inability to reach consensus. And the part that sent the assessment division into crisis was not that we had failed. It was that we had, while failing, continued to function. That Gene had maintained his schedules while dying of something that should have made schedules impossible. That Len had kept repairing things even as the situation deteriorated around him. That Anna had fed the boy every day, without exception, regardless of what the evenings brought. That Patrick had kept his record of the ground he had covered. That I had kept transmitting. We had not been trying to survive. We had been surviving as a byproduct of refusing to stop doing the things we did. This was not a concept the Confluence had a column for. I decoded their response over 3 days. Anna helped. Though she did not know she was helping, she sat nearby and said practical things about what the patterns might mean, and occasionally was right. In the way that people who are smart and have been paying close attention to a problem can be right without having the specialist vocabulary to explain their reasoning. Patrick helped by not asking how long it would take, which meant I could work without the particular pressure of being watched for signs of progress. The response was, in essence, "We see you, we are confused by you, we are coming down." They sent 2 ships. I found out later that this was considered by the Confluence to be a minimal deployment, essentially equivalent to sending 1 person to knock on a door. But the ships were large, and they came in low over the water at first light. And the sound they made was not the sound of any engine I had ever heard. It was a subsonic presence that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. Patrick was already outside when they appeared on the horizon. He was standing at the waterline with a smooth rock in each hand, watching. Anna appeared in the caravan doorway behind me and said something in Greek that I did not speak and did not need to. They landed on the headland above the beach. They were careful about it. Precise in a way that communicated awareness of our presence. Awareness of the scale difference between their ships and our caravan. The landing ramps came down, and the Confluence's contact team descended into the morning light. And I walked up to meet them with my notebook under my arm and the most recent signal printouts in my hand and sand in my shoes. I will not attempt to describe the Confluence's physical form in detail. I have given that description in other contexts for other purposes, and I find that it loses something each time, becoming flatter and more inadequate. I will say that their scale is different and that their movement is different, and that the first thing they communicated to me through a sheet system they had been building from my transmissions for 3 days was a question. The question was, "Are there more of you?" I said no. They were silent for what I later understood was a very long time for them. Then they asked, "What do you require?" I thought about this. I thought about what I actually required in the practical sense, and about what might be available from a species with 2 ships large enough to come in low over the Mediterranean and not disturb the water. And about what Patrick would need in the years ahead. And about Anna and the way she had set Greif down and kept walking. And about Jean's schedules and the boat. And about Len on his motorbike following the coast road toward whatever he had hoped to find. Said, medicine, food, seeds if you have them. And somewhere to put 3 people who are still alive and intend to stay that way. The confluence was silent again. Then one of them, the contact team's senior archivist, I would later learn, a position of significant standing, did something I did not expect. It moved closer, not in any threatening way, and it examined my notebook. Not the pages, the cover, the condition of it, the tape I had used to hold the spine together, the handwriting visible through the worn places. It said, through the translator, "You continued to transmit." "For how long?" He said, 3 months before I found the others, then another 6 weeks after. It said, during the conflict. I said, "The conflict was mostly over by the time I started. But yes, while the fallout was still active, while the roads were what they were." It was silent again. Then it said, and this is the part I was asked to include in the testimony, because the confluence has apparently included it in their records as the primary data point from the first contact, which I find alternately flattering and baffling. It said, "You knew no one was listening, and you kept transmitting anyway." I said, "I knew no one on Earth was listening." I thought the mathematics suggested something else might be. It said, "Your mathematics was imprecise." I said, "Yes, my equipment was also imprecise, and my aim, and my power source. A lot of things were imprecise. 3 of us are still alive." Shh. I am told this response was discussed in the assessment division for several weeks. I am told it was not a short discussion. The ship stayed for 11 days. They had medicine, though not quite the medicine I had asked for, because the medicine I had asked for was calibrated to human biology, and they had not known, until recently, that human biology existed. They improvised. I helped where I could and stayed out of the way where I could not. It became, within 3 days, the most practically effective human being in any cross-species medical improvisation I have ever witnessed, because she had been fixing things without the right tools for months. And she brought exactly that skill set to this new problem, without appearing to find the shift remarkable. Patrick continued his rock collection. He added 2 that he found on the headland near the ships, which he named for the ships. He showed these to the junior members of the contact team, who examined them with the focused interest of beings encountering the concept of a personal curated collection for the first time. And I watched this happen, and I am still not certain I interpreted it correctly, appeared to be affected by it, in some way I could not precisely identify. On the 8th day, the senior archivist asked me to explain the rock collection. I did my best. It said he is keeping a record of where he has been. I said yes, it said, so that it is not lost. I said, I think so. Yes, it was quiet for a while. Then it said, your species was 11 months from complete extinction when you transmitted. I said, I know. It said, you transmitted anyway. I said, there wasn't a reason not to. It said, your reasoning process interests us considerably. I said, my reasoning process is a mess. I had a notebook and a transmitter and a working assumption, and I was alone on a road with a dying dog, and I did not know what else to do. That is the full extent of my reasoning process. It said, yes, this is what interests us. They took us off the shore on the 11th day. Not by force and not urgently. They gave us time to take what we wanted to take. Patrick took his rocks. Anna took the tools. I took the transmitter and the notebook. None of us discussed what we were leaving behind. None of us looked back at the caravan as the ramp closed. Or, if we did not mention it to each other. And I have not mentioned it until now. The confluence spent the transit time asking me questions. Most of the questions were about the beach, about the 5 weeks, about how a group of 5 people could be simultaneously functional and self-destructive, about why we had not been able to simply reach a consensus arrangement that allowed all parties to survive. I told them that human beings were not consensus animals, that we were argument animals, that our entire history was the record of what happens when argument animals try to build things together, which is that the things we build are extraordinary and held together with wire and spite, and the particular stubbornness of people who refuse to admit the thing cannot be done, and also that we periodically tear them down because one faction or another decides the arrangement is intolerable, I said. We have been doing this since before we had writing to record it with. We have never solved it. We have never been able to solve it. The bomb was us solving it with the biggest possible argument, the archivist said. And yet you continue. I said, we appear to be unable to stop. It said, this is very different from how we work. I said, I know. I have been trying to understand how you work for 8 days, and I am beginning to think it might take longer than that. It said, you are correct. But we will try. That was the first thing it said that made me laugh. It did not understand the laugh. I tried to explain it. It asked several follow-up questions about the relationship between absurdity and tension release and fuss, whether this was a communication behavior or a physiological one. It said probably both. It said probably. We are going to be studying you for a long time. I said, I know. We are going to be arguing with you for a long time. It said, yes, we are aware. This uncomfortable, and also in a way we do not yet fully have language for, not without value. That is the part of the testimony that the archivists always ask me to repeat. Not because they do not understand it. They have it recorded. They can replay it with more fidelity than my memory provides. They ask me to repeat it because they want to hear it in my voice, with my imprecisions, with the pauses I put in wrong places, and the words I choose that are slightly not quite right. They want the noise of it. It took me a long time to understand why. I think I understand it now. Patrick is 17, by my best estimate, as I write this. He has continued his rock collection. It takes up 3 shelves in the quarters they gave him, organized by the same system, not size or color but provenance, where each was found, with a small notation beside each one in his own handwriting. And includes rocks from 4 different worlds, a piece of hull plating from a decommissioned Confluence archive vessel that a technician gave him because he asked for it politely, and a particular fragment of limestone from the headland above our beach that he went back for, specifically, when the Confluence offered us the opportunity to return to Earth for a surface survey. He asked me on the way back up if I thought he was being foolish. I said, foolish how? He said, keeping all of it. It takes up a lot of room. It doesn't do anything. I said, you've been keeping that record since you were 11 years old in the worst circumstances imaginable, and you've kept it faithfully, and it has never failed to be exactly what it is. It's more than I can say for most things. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, Quentin, do you think there are other? I said, other what? He said, other humans anywhere. I know what the surveys say. The surveys are imprecise. I looked at him. He looked at me. We were, I thought, having a conversation that we had both been preparing to have for 6 years, circling around it the way you circle something that matters too much to approach directly. I said, the mathematics suggests it's not impossible. He said, that's what you said about the transmitter. I said, yes, that's what I said about the transmitter. He nodded. He looked out the viewport at the planet below, at the brown and gray of the dead northern hemisphere and the patches of uncertain green beginning in the south, slow and unimpressive and present. He said, I want to transmit. I said, He said, will the Confluence let us use their equipment? I said, they will argue about it first. But yes, he almost smiled. He said, they're getting better at arguing. I said, they are. I find this concerning and also not without value. He did look at me then, and I saw Jean in the shape of his face, around the eyes, and Anna in the way his mouth held itself, and I saw the boy who had organized his rocks by where he had been, because he understood instinctively that a record matters, that the ground you have covered matters, that you do not abandon the account of it, even when the account is difficult to keep. I said, we'll need a better transmitter than last time, he said. I know. I've been thinking about the mathematics. Of course he had. Took out my notebook. Not the original, which is in the Confluence's archive under 3 levels of preservation protocols. But the one I have been keeping since, same size, same kind of cover, already falling apart from being handled too much. I opened it to a blank page, I said. Show me what you have. We sat in the viewport light, with the dead planet below us, and the Confluence's ships around us, and 3 years of accumulated notes and wrong turns between us, and we began. That is what I can tell you. That is the account. As linear as I can make it, with the grief carried in one hand, and the other thing in the other, the thing that does not quite have a name in any language, I know. The thing that kept a man transmitting on a dead frequency, because the mathematics that said something should be listening, that kept a boy arranging rocks by provenance, because the record matters, that kept a woman fixing things without the right tools, because the things needed to be fixed. The Confluence's archivists will file this under humanity, behavioral profile, primary observations. Would file it differently. I would file it under still here, still transmitting. Ask us again tomorrow.